Hi, my name's Bob Brown and welcome to my 8 and 35mm channel. If you recall, in a previous video, I scanned in images that were negatives and they're now digitized. I'm going to process one of those images here. I'm going to do both black and white and color, but this particular video is going to deal only with processing a black and white image. Now, the image I use is clearly not going to be a great image by any stretch. I shot it back in, I think 1979. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But anyway, it's not a good image to say the least, but it's a great image to process for this example of how to process an image because it has so many problems. We're talking speckles, some minor scratches. When I say scratches, they look like scratches. They're just kind of kind of like an etching line on it, and also some tonal problems. And well, you'll see because we're going to do it in real time. Whew. All right, let's go ahead and process that image. This is two versions of the same image. The one on the left is completely unprocessed. It's exactly how it came out of the scanner. The one on the right is the processed version of that same image. Here's a larger version of the unprocessed image. We need to address and fix all kinds of problems with it. I don't want to crop that image, so that blurry bottom rail needs to stay there, as indicated with that blue arrow. I shot that image from my table, right next to that railing. I'm not going to eliminate that rail, but I am going to make it so it works with that picture, kind of adds to its weight at the bottom. I'll go more into that when we edit the thing. Those green arrows point out just 3 of those 8 billion speckles all over this image. We're going to fix all of them. Those red arrows point out completely blown out areas. Believe it or not, we can fix that too. Our goal is real simple, to go from that image on the left to that final image on the right. All right, let's go ahead and process that image. This is our unprocessed image opened in Photoshop. The first thing I always do is I make a copy of the original. That way the original remains protected. To do that, just drag the original down on top of that icon at the bottom with the plus sign. Then select the eyeball to the left of the original layer, and that will make it invisible. We will no longer touch that layer. Now I'm going to rename our new copy Despeckle. We're going to do all of our cleanup on that layer. My first line of defense is my Despeckle software. To do that, I'll go to the Filter tab, select LaserSoft Imaging, and then select SRDx. That opens my Despeckle browser. There's 3 tabs at the top left. The first says Original, which is the starting point, the photo we're looking at right now. The second tab is the Mark Defects tab. That's where all the speckles get marked up for removal. The last tab, which says Optimized, allows you to see the results of what you just did in the Mark Defects section. Now look at the upper right panel. Since all of our speckles in this image are white, we'll select the Bright Defect box. The Detection Intensity slider allows us to adjust how aggressively we want to attack those speckles. The Tile Size allows us to adjust to the average size of each speckle. Now let's look at the advanced settings, which really doesn't seem that advanced. The Detect Marking is nothing more than a manual mode. It simply allows you to manually add or subtract speckles. You're going to see how easy all of this is because we're going to work with all of it. Once you've decided you've done all you can do with this software, then you'll select the OK button and you'll go back to Photoshop. Oh, and by the way, I'm using this as a Photoshop plugin. You can also purchase this as a standalone product. I'll leave a link in the description area. Let's clean this thing up. First of all, this image has so many speckles, it almost looks like it's snowing in that room. Have no fear, we're going to fix every single one of those speckles. We'll start the cleanup in this software, and then we're going to move back into Photoshop. The first thing we need to do is select the Mark Defects tab, which is where we're going to edit out most of those speckles. As a reminder, the adjustment panel is along the right side. Notice the software already found a lot of those speckles, as represented by those red marks. Currently, our detection sensitivity is set to 12. Now let's bump it up to 14. And 15. Now, let's select the Optimize tab to see how things turned out. Wow, the software did a great job. I think that setting of 15 on the intensity was correct. It seems pretty obvious to me this software saves a lot of cleanup time. Now let's reselect the Mark Defects tab and return to the Advanced Settings section, where we'll do a few manual adjustments. For whatever reason, my yellow circle on my black cursor, well, that doesn't show on the screen in the workspace area. I'll put a yellow circle around my first adjustment, just so you can see it. My cursor's so small, I can barely see it. In the case of this first selection, I'm adding to it, which will hopefully subtract out that speckle. I'm going to go back and forth between the brush tool, which adds to the selection, and the eraser tool, which subtracts from the selection. To move things along, I'm going to speed up the video in this section. Once you've finished, select the Optimize tab and check out your work. Wow, that came out great. That's a night and day difference. If you're satisfied with your results, and I am, then go to the bottom right of the browser and select OK, and that will bring us back to Photoshop. That green process bar is now processing and loading our image. Now we're going to finish cleaning up this image. The despeckling software can only do so much. But the good news is, it did get most of it. I'm going to need only two tools to finish up the rest of this. One is the Spot Healing Brush tool, and the other one is the Clone tool. The first thing I do is set the image at 200%. That way I can see every remaining speckle and anything else that might need cleaning up. To keep myself from getting lost, I always start in the upper left-hand corner. Then I work across the entire image towards the right. Once I get there, I'll then move the image down a little bit and then do a full sweep all the way to the left side of the picture, and then down again, then a sweep all the way to the right, and so on until I'm completely done. To save time like before, I'm going to speed this video up. You'll see the first part of this, and we'll cut right to the end. I don't want anyone to go on suicide watch from having to sit through this whole thing. As you can see, I'm using the Spot Healing Brush for these speckles. The letter J is the shortcut for that tool. The letter S is the shortcut for the Clone tool. I suggest you learn as many shortcut keys as you can because they are really huge time savers. The Spot Healing Brush tool doesn't work very good in this section, so I switched over to the Clone tool, which worked great in this instance. Now I'm going to make a copy of the top layer. The reason for that is I want to protect the work I've already done. In other words, if I screw something up, I could simply go back to that despeckled layer and pick it back up from that point. It's kind of a safety net, if you will. I'll rename that new layer Camera Raw. I'll then go over to the taskbar and select Filter, drop down, and select Camera Raw Filter. That will bring us to the Camera Raw editor, which is where we'll make our tonal adjustments. Those red areas in the background are areas that are completely blown out. Watch how I make adjustments to bring that back in again to where it's somewhat normalized. The first thing I usually like to do is make global adjustments. And I do that by using the slider bars for the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. I'll go back and forth with these adjustments, and I'll continue to tweak it until I'm completely satisfied with my adjustments. To save time in this video, I'm going to speed it up here and there. My last global adjustments are in the Effects section. There I can adjust texture, clarity, dehaze. I don't want a vignette on this image, so I'm not going to mess with that slider. Just a heads up with these sliders. You got to be really careful because it's easy to put too much texture, clarity, and dehaze on your image. If you do that, you'll end up with a real gritty, harsh-looking image. In other words, try to make subtle changes. That button right there is a before and after toggle button, which allows you to see your work before and after. Oh, and by the way, any changes you make in one section can affect another, so you might have to make multiple tweaks. Once I finish with the global adjustments, I then switch over to targeted adjustments. These are adjustments for specific areas. You can make these adjustments with different types of masks. In the case of this image, I'm going to use the brush mask. In other words, I'm going to paint in my mask on top of specific areas. With that brush mask, I'll be able to control the size of the brush, how much I can feather that brush, the flow, the density. I can then make adjustments, as you can see below where it says light. And those are the same adjustments we used for the global aspects. Believe it or not, I like that railing at the bottom. Currently, it's too light and it creates a distraction. I want to darken it to add some weight to the bottom of the image. Instead of me yapping in this section, you can just watch what I do. I'm not sure if you noticed or not, but the railing at the bottom is a little bit darker right now. That's because I went ahead and did another pass on it. I wasn't quite satisfied with how dark it was, so I just wanted to make it a little bit darker. I didn't record it because I figured I'd just tell you. It saved a lot of time. As for that wreath, I just want to darken it up a little bit. Those roses are blown out. There's nothing I can do to fix it because there's really no rose in that entire wreath that's in good enough shape to steal from. So the only thing I'm going to do is just darken it up a little bit. I'm sure there's many ways to fix the blown out areas on the back wall. I'm just going to do it the way I do it. It works for me. I'll use the following tools to do this, and one of them is the rectangle marquee tool, the brush tool, the eraser tool, the curves adjustment. I'll go to filter and add noise. I'll work with the opacity, and I'll use layer masks. Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. The first thing I'm going to do is use the rectangle marquee tool, and I'm going to use that to steal a section off the back wall, which is in good shape, which is along the right side of that back wall. Let's select and copy a section of that back wall. Once you make your selection, then right-click on that selection and select Layer via Copy. And there's the new layer of our selection. When I do stuff like this on my own, I always use shortcut keys. We're going to use parts of that selection to take care of all of that back wall. Next, select the Move tool. To move that selection, just click on it and you can move it in any direction, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and move it horizontally to the left. The Shift key will allow your selection to move in a straight line. Now I'll try to line up the grout lines with the selection with the grout lines on the layer underneath. Don't be afraid to use the up and down arrows to nudge your selection. All right, that looks pretty good. Now we'll go over to the opacity slider and reduce the opacity of the selection until it gets really close to where it matches the tiles to the right of it. Now I'm going to use the eraser tool to clean up some of the overlaps. You got to be careful with this tool because it is destructive. If you do make a mistake, just go to Control or Command Z. That will undo what you just did. I want to erase the bottom part of our selection, but I want it to be perfectly straight. All you have to do is go to the left side of where you want to start, left click, then go all the way to the right side of where you want to end, hold the Shift key, and click. It'll erase all of that in a straight line. When I get really close to the edge of the wreath, what I'll do is change the opacity on the tool so that it blends in much better. I probably should have used a layers mask for this, but I got lazy. Don't worry, I will switch over to a layers mask as well. Now let's make a copy of that first layer in order to extend the length of our selection. Notice that selection got really dark. That's because we have two layers stacked one on top of the other. Next, I'll slide down the top layer and cover the blown out section below. Next, I'll erase the sections I don't want. You can also do this with masks, which are non-destructive. When I say non-destructive, I mean they don't affect pixels. I think I'll slide that top layer down. From this point forward, I'm just going to work my selections by going back and forth and making all these adjustments until I'm completely satisfied. To save time, I'll speed the video up in this section. Once satisfied, I'll merge those two top layers. I do that by highlighting both layers, and then I'll right-click and select Merge Layers to make them one single layer. Next, I'll go to the Adjustment tab and select Curves. The reason for using the curves is to blend in that selection a little bit better. Normally, I'd go to one of the blending modes, but they don't really work very well for this black and white image. So, curves it is. I want that new curves layer to only affect the layer below. To do that, hold down the Alt or Option key and hover the cursor over the curves adjustment layer. When you hit the right spot on that layer, the cursor will change to a down arrow. Then left click, and that will assign that adjustment layer only to the layer below. Now I'll make a curves adjustment until my selection blends in to my satisfaction. All right, that looks pretty good. At this point, I want to make a copy of those top two layers. To do that, I'll select them, drag them down to the plus sign at the bottom, and boom, we have a copy of our two new layers. Now I'll select the eyeballs on the old layers, and that will turn off those layers, which will now serve as my backup. Now I'll select the two new top layers and right-click, merge via copy, which will now make them a single layer. I can now use that single layer to make one final adjustment. With our new top layer selected, I'll go to the Filter tab, look for Noise, and then Add Noise. My goal is to add just enough noise where it matches the rest of the image. That way everything will blend perfectly. That looks pretty good. Now let's do a quick before and after. I think we can make this selection just a little bit better, so I'm going to add a layers mask to this layer. And there it is. With that mask selected, I'll now use a paintbrush with black paint and a reduced opacity to go back over the areas I want to just slightly clean up for a better blend. Well, I think that's good enough. Hopefully you'll agree that wall looks like it was never blown out. Looks pretty good. Now I'll make a copy of everything we just did. I'll take that copy, slide it over into the wreath, fix that section in the middle, then make another copy and slide that over all the way to the left and fix that blown out area. We won't have to rotate any of the selections because you'll never notice any repeating patterns in this situation. I'm going to kick the video speed up into overdrive to get through this section really fast. As a reminder, the only thing I'm affecting here is the active layer. And since I'm using a mask, everything is also non-destructive. No pixels get affected. And finally, I'll take those top 3 layers, highlight them, and then select the folder icon at the bottom, and that will put them into a group, a folder. Or the simple way is just highlight them and go Control or Command G. I'll now rename the folder to Back Wall. Here's some quick before and afters of the back wall. Now I'm going to combine all of our images into one single final image without affecting our current layers. I don't think this is in a drop-down box, but here's the shortcut keys to do that. Press the following keys: Alt, Control, Shift, and E, or Alt, Command, Shift, and E if you're on a Mac. And there's the final image at the top. I'll now rename it Final Image. I know, very original. I think there's one last thing I'd like to do, and that is add just a tad of sharpening. I'm going to sharpen this the way I like to sharpen it. It's my favorite method. To do that, I'm going to make a copy of this image, drag it down onto the plus sign, and now I have a copy of that image. And what I'll do from this point is go to Filter, Other, where is it? High Pass. And now this is the high pass filter. You have to be really careful when you sharpen an image like this because the image is already kind of grainy, noisy, if you will. The original image was Tri-X film, which was a grainy film. Once it gets scanned, then it appears as noise. In the case of this image, you can see the noise, but it kind of, to me anyway, it adds a little character to it, like it's grainy. You adjust this filter or the amount of sharpening with the slider bar over here. And if I go to, let's say 6, you can see this is just way too much. If I let this go, it's going to be super grainy. As a matter of fact, let's just do that real quick just to see it. I'll go OK. And then I'll go to normal. Then overlay is what you select. That's the blending mode. And then you can see here the difference between the two. Yes, it's sharper, but so is all the grain inside of it. It's very gritty looking. It doesn't look good. So I'm going to go Control or Command Z and back off until I'm back to where I started. Then I'll go back to the filter, other, high pass, and I'm going to back way off of that. I think that should be okay there, but if it's a little too much, I'll show you how to back off of that. Select OK, go to the blending modes and select overlay. And that looks a little too much to me. And so what I'll do is go to the opacity, back off a little bit on that opacity. And that looks pretty good. So let's undo this real quick by selecting the eyeball. Okay, and yes, that looks pretty good, and it helps the image a lot. I'm going to combine these two to make this the final image. I already have the top layer highlighted. Going to go to the Control key and select the one under it. Then right-click, go down to Merge Layers, and then we'll change the name to Final Image instead of Final Image Copy. And that's our final image. I'm only going to keep two active layers. That's the top one that's finished and the original. The rest I'll turn off. All right, here's our before image. And here's our final image. Before, after. On a side note, if you look at the back wall on the processed image, I did go back and do a little bit more work on that because I wasn't completely satisfied with it. So now it blends in really good. If you recall, at the end of this last segment, what I did was I mentioned I reworked the back wall a little bit because I really wasn't satisfied with it. So here's what I did. Hopefully this will go quick. I dumped the last final image, and then I went down. Remember, we saved everything as we went along, so I didn't have to start from scratch. I just needed to go to the folder where I saved the 3 selections, and I think I called it back wall, the folder. And I went to the right side selection or right wall or what I don't remember what I named it. Short-term memory loss. So then I went to that layer, and luckily they are all masked. So they all have layer masks on them. I go to the mask, you select that. And then I got a paintbrush with black paint. And remember, we're only going to work the mask, not touch the selection. That way we don't affect any pixels and it creates no damage at all. So I went and worked the right side of that wall and got it to where I wanted. And I used, I think, an opacity of about, I want to say about 11%, might be 9 on the paintbrush. So it wouldn't be an extreme change. And I just subtly brushed the right side away until it blended down and mixed in perfectly, or at least till I was happy. And that was that. After that, I needed to resave everything. And I did that by going, what was it? It's weird doing it without a computer in front of me. It's Alt, Control, Shift, and E. And remember, what that does is it creates a new image from all of the underlying layers without affecting any of those layers. They all stay put. Then the only thing left to do was to resharpen the image. And to do that, I went to Filter, Other, and then High Pass Filter. And then set the sharpening like we did earlier and put it back the way it was. I don't think I needed to do anything because it was already set to the correct sharpening. And that was it. And that allowed for the final image. All right. Well, the good news is all these things we did here, you can use these techniques on any image. I don't care if it's a modern day camera or if it's from old negatives. All of these techniques will work. The next video, I'm going to do a color image, but I'm not going to get one that's this brutal. It requires this much work. Although I am going to pick up where this left off in terms of uh, tonal changes, color, saturation, things of that nature, because color has some different requirements. And we'll address all of those requirements. And I don't think there's anything else. And hopefully, well, hopefully, you got something out of this. And you might have some better techniques than what I used, but these worked for me. And as you could see, they worked pretty good. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the color video.